President. Mr. President, I rise to describe an amazing journey that I took this weekend that was a powerful journey connected to my Virginia National Guard and also to issues that are very, very prominent right now in the world. We finished voting on the Senate floor a little bit before 5 a.m. on Friday on the reconciliation bill, and a few hours later I went to Dulles Airport and flew to Finland. Landed in Helsinki at about 1:30 on Saturday, went back to the airport at 1:30 on Monday, spent 48 hours on the ground with one of our newest NATO allies to work together with them on a number of issues. The reason for the visit over the weekend was to see my Virginia National Guard. The Virginia Guard, as most states, are active participants in the state partnership program that was established back in the 1990s, where a state's guard unit connects with the military of an allied country and engages in joint training exercises. Once Finland decided to join NATO, Virginia, which already has a partner in the state partnership program, reached out and said to Finland, we would like to work together with you as well. My governor, Governor Youngkin, helped preside over the signing of this partnership program in 2024, and the Virginia Guard, about 50 members of the Guard, were engaged in the first training exercises in Finland. As governor of Virginia, I used to be the commander-in-chief of the Virginia Guard. I've been very close to them, and I wanted to go see my Virginians training in snowy birch forests in southern Finland this weekend. And I was able to do that. My Guard unit is training with the Karelia Brigade, which is one of the 3 brigades of the Finnish Army. It's got a long history of very heroic service. And on Sunday, it was a delight to drive 2.5 hours outside of Helsinki and visit with my 50 Virginians and to hear the Finnish Army brag about them. That your Guard are well-trained, they're great marksmen, even shooting Finnish rifles, which are different than the rifles they use every day, and doing it in temperatures that are far colder than Virginians normally have to experience on training exercises. In addition to my time with the Virginia Guard, I spent time in Finland with our own embassy team, with representatives from EUCOM, the European Command of the United States Army, with the President of Finland, President Stubb, who is a pretty amazing guy who attended Furman University on a golf scholarship and manages to drop the word y'all into a lot of sentences in a pretty thick Finnish accent. I spent time with the Foreign Minister and with the Permanent Defense Secretary, and also visited the Helsinki shipyard, which is about to start working in tandem with the United States and Canada to build icebreakers, which is something we desperately need. So it was a great trip, too short, but really powerful, and I returned last night having interacted with my Virginians and known a lot more. There was a sobering element to it, too, and that's really why I wanted to come and speak. To be in Finland, a nation that had to fight 2 wars against Russia in the late 1930s, early 1940s to maintain its independence, and to be there with those leaders on the 3rd anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine was sobering and thought-provoking. Finland knows Russia and Russian leadership better than just about anybody because of this hundreds of miles of border between the 2 nations. And that memory of fighting 2 wars against Russia to maintain Finnish independence is still a very present day and palpable memory for the Finns, even though those wars happened in the late 1930s and early 1940s. And you can be sure, Mr. President, that our friends, our allies, those we are training together with, had some pretty strong thoughts about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the commemoration of the 3rd anniversary. I was very disappointed, and I think many were, that yesterday the UN considered competing resolutions on the 3rd anniversary of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. One was a Ukrainian resolution that talked about Russia as the invader, Russia as the instigator of the war. That resolution passed the General Assembly, but in a shocking move, the United States voted against it because of the language placing the blame for the war on Russia. There had been previous resolutions after the invasion and on the 2nd anniversary, the 1st anniversary, saying this war was started by Russia, that the U.S. led those resolutions. But now the U.S., through our president, through our Secretary of Defense, through the UN we don't have a permanent UN ambassador now, but through the U.S. representative at the UN, was unwilling to sign onto and vote for a resolution that talked about Russia as being responsible for the war. And so we opposed the Ukrainian resolution. Who voted with us to oppose this resolution? Russia opposed, North Korea opposed, Nicaragua opposed, another 15 nations opposed, about 60 nations abstained, including China. China wouldn't vote no, China abstained, and 90+ nations voted yes. The resolution passed, but it passed with the United States unwilling to sign on to the proposition that Russia started this war and should not have done so. There was also a United States resolution that was tendered to the UN General Assembly. That U.S. resolution did not mention anyone as being responsible for the war, but called for a ceasefire and peace, obviously. The U.S. resolution was subject to an amendment that was offered by the UK and other nations, inserting the language in that Russia was responsible for the war and should not have done so. That amendment passed, and because it passed, the U.S. ended up not even being willing to vote yes on its own resolution and instead abstained. These Finnish colleagues, who are friends and allies, were pretty candid about their disappointment in the United States for not being willing to state a truth that this war was instigated by Russia. And they deeply want to be partners with the United States on defense, hence their accession to NATO, hence their agreement to the State Partnership Program with Virginia. But they're puzzled with an American leadership, from the President to the Secretary of Defense to the UN, that's unwilling to state that Russia started this war. I came home, Mr. President, last night. It was a long flight, made too long because of a cancellation. I got back a good bit later than I had originally planned, but I had a lot of time to think. And what I thought about was basically this: we need to learn some lessons. We need to remember the lessons of 1938. Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of England, went to Munich thinking he could find an end to war and deliver what he called peace in our time. And he negotiated with the German government and came back to England and said, there is now peace in our time, which anyone in politics would love to be able to say, but we all know that that Munich agreement was a disaster. It was negotiated between England and Germany, but many of the other nations that were later invaded by Germany weren't there, and it wasn't a peace agreement, and they suffered. But did England at least protect itself from suffering by signing a deal and proclaiming peace in our time? No. England was attacked as well after the Germans had attacked Belgium and France and Poland and other nations. So an illusory peace in our time deal was just that. It was illusory. You can't appease a bully. They will bully you and others unless you stand up to them. Or we could remember 1975. In 1975, the Helsinki Accords, right in the community where I was visiting, were signed. The Soviet Union was a signator, along with the United States and Canada and European nations, to guarantee certain principles, including the guarantee of the inviolability of national sovereignty and that no nation should be able to invade the sovereignty of others. We need to remember that. We celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Accords this summer. We need to remember those principles and who has violated them and who has not. Let's remember 1995. In 1995, as an aftermath of the Helsinki Accords, we helped form the OSCE, the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe. It's the one organization that includes all European nations, and including Russia. NATO doesn't include all. The OSCE does. The OSCE, again, was committed to the principles of the Helsinki Accords, protecting national sovereignty, and we need to remember who has violated those principles and who hasn't. And, Mr. President, we should remember 2020. 5 years ago this week, in 2020, the Doha Accords. President Trump negotiated a, quote, peace accord with the Taliban. A peace accord with the Taliban. Afghanistan was not allowed to be at the table. The government of Afghanistan, that had been our partner, in whom we had invested hundreds of billions of dollars, was not allowed to be at the table. And so, yes, there was a, quote, peace deal. There was peace in our time, but the peace proved to be illusory and catastrophic months later when the United States removed troops pursuant to the Doha Accord, the absence of inclusion of the Afghan government led to a demoralization and a collapse, and the Inspector General that analyzed the end of our military participation in Afghanistan had plenty of blame to assign. Blame to the Biden administration, but also blame to President Trump, who negotiated a deal without including the party that was most affected. I thought of the Doha Accord when I saw the news of negotiations in Riyadh between the United States and Russia to end the war in Ukraine, and noticed that Ukraine was not at the table. A peace deal about a nation's sovereignty where you're not allowing that nation to be at the table is doomed to failure. And we need to remember those lessons in connection with any discussion about the future of Ukraine. Mr. President, you don't even need to completely remember history. Just remember what your mom or dad told you. I know I had this call, and I think most people remember this. You're getting bullied at school, and you go home and you complain to your parents, and what do your parents tell you about bullies? If you give in to them, they will keep bullying you and others. If you stand up to them, they're more likely, not guaranteed, but they're more likely to stop bullying. The United States should have been willing yesterday in the UN to stand up to a bully. The United States should have been willing to say this was an illegal war unjustly initiated by Russia. If you're unwilling to state a truth, you begin in a very weak position. And so my thought in coming home from visiting my own troops, who are sacrificing and risking to train for an action that they know they may one day be called on to support, else they wouldn't be conducting training in a snowy birch forest in southern Finland in February of 2025. They're there because they're willing to sacrifice. It takes sacrifice to protect democracy. Our nation is coming up on the 250th anniversary of our democracy, and not only our democracy, but our leadership role in democracies around the globe. The world needs us to continue to stand strong. Our friends like Finland are hoping and praying that we continue to stand strong. It is my belief that in the heart of the American people, a desire to continue to stand strong. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.